Welcome to our midday keynote. Chuck Mattera knows a thing or two about acquisitions. Over the past 20 years, he and his team at 26 Inc. have been part of more than 20 deals. 2 years ago, Chuck oversaw the company's largest acquisition to date, buying $1.3 billion Finisar Corporation in a monster deal that supercharged the manufacture of engineered materials, optoelectronic components, and optical systems. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chuck Mattera, Chairman and CEO of 26. And sitting down with Chuck for today's discussion is Dustin Klein, Chief Content Officer of Smart Business. Chuck and Dustin, the stage is yours.
Well, Chuck, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you sitting down with us here at the Dealmakers Conference.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So, Chuck, you guys had done a very large acquisition a couple years back, 2019. And last year was supposed to be a big integration year. And then we had COVID hit. So from a macro level, what were some of the most challenging issues that you had to deal with that integration of Finisar during COVID?
Okay. Well, one of the nice things about the acquisition, we announced the acquisition in November of 2018. But we actually started planning for the acquisition for quite some time before. And not only planning for that acquisition, but we've done more than 20 before that. So we've had a lot of experience inside the company, and our opportunities as they've grown, we've added more talent to the team that have such experience. I would say planning was about 80% of it. And in our culture, even despite COVID-19, everybody knew exactly what they needed to do, what needed to be done, and we got on with doing it. And COVID caused us to go to the sidelines to pause, but we quickly reconfigured ourselves safely, got back to business. And I can say this, in 15 months or so that we've been operating at it, we just announced earlier this week that we'll actually achieve our synergy target that was set for 3 years. We'll achieve it in 2 years. And we took up our total synergy target again for the third year. So it's pretty exciting.
So what were some of the reasons you were able to do that, to really get ahead of schedule?
Well, the market itself really provided a nice tailwind for us. And it turns out that the digital transformation is accelerating. And COVID-19 and work from home and school from home and telemedicine, all of those secular trends have added extremely high demand for our products during this time. That's number one. But in the backdrop, people do everything. Markets are nice to have. Customers are great. But at the end of the day, our enterprise-wide culture that underpins a 22,000 person workforce, they got it done whether they were working in a factory or from home. And with over 70 locations in 18 countries, our task quickly turned to providing an emergency business continuity planning and overall pandemic response worldwide.
So let me ask this, you've mentioned priorities for your team before being in safety, as well as having regular communications during that time, your pandemic plan. How did you approach it? And just as important, how long from the time the pandemic began to rapidly spread across the world with so many locations were you able to take action?
Okay, that's another great question. I took a time out. I returned from China. I was in China in the first and second week of January of last year. And when I returned to the same headlines and same warnings and cautions and feedback from my team. I would say that it took us less than a week to realize that something was in the winds. And so our team in China, which of course was the first wave, they were both listening and getting organized around an overall pandemic response for our China-based employees. And I have to tell you, around the clock did they work. And they put an infrastructure in place around 14,000 people And in a very, very short time, in less than 2 weeks, we actually had a blueprint that we could port to the whole rest of the company. And that's how we did it. They went off for the Chinese New Year. It took a few extra weeks while they were home, but when they came back in March, they really came back with an accelerated rate. They were what I call sprinting the marathon. And the lessons that were learned and the deployment of those lessons around the company, I believe, put us out in front of our competitors by at least 30 days, maybe longer. And I think that's partly how we were able to grow and be as successful as we were right from the outset.
Now that's great that you were able to do that, and having the folks on the ground there were almost ground zero, so to speak, made a big difference. For edification of the folks who are out there who may not be familiar with your company and some of the products that you do and the markets that you serve, can you give us just briefly a little bit of information about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, we started business nearly 50 years ago. On June 22nd of this year, we'll celebrate our 50th anniversary. We intend to be at the NASDAQ stock market, where I guess you used to ring the bell, but I think now you press the LED. But we'll be there for that. The company started and has at its core engineered materials, and for which we have grown by acquiring companies, investing subsequently, building out technology platforms to serve multiple markets. Our largest market that we serve today is in communications, but in addition to communications, we serve a large number of other markets, including in the industrial market, which was the original market that we were founded in to serve, into the life sciences, into aerospace and defense, into semiconductor capital equipment, in the consumer electronics market, and in the automotive market. So if you look around all of the things that are vital today that are outside software, I like to think about the major market mega trends. If you take it up at the highest level where our concentration is that we are focused on mobile, intelligent, and electric. And those major mega market trends, we think, will continue to drive great opportunity for us, not only as a company, but also in order to do what we really are aiming to do, and that is to change the world.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating having a chance to kind of read a little bit more about your company and some of the product mixes that you had in the markets that you're serving. Your product mix is about 70% photonic solutions, 30% compound semiconductors. I mean, you're right in the square in the middle of this digital revolution that's underway in America. Not even just America, the world.
That's correct.
And with this explosion in the demand of telecom and datacom solutions, not just because we're at home right now and have been for almost a year, but it was already on a growth curve before that. What type of supply chain interruptions, if any, did you guys face that might have impacted you and your integration and your growth over the last year?
Okay, is another really, really important topic. When we envisioned the combination of these two great companies, Finisar and II-VI, we had in mind that the resulting scale, large increase in scale, would really benefit us in many ways. Finisar had put in place a world-class procurement organization and supply chain system, and we at II-VI had a great approach to it, but it was fragmented. So we built out functional organizations across the company to support the two operating segments, both photonic solutions and compound semiconductors. But our supply chain management is one of the most important elements of our manufacturing and operations strategy. They really did a fantastic job. We have the largest supply chain management organization in our industry, and we got organized around it. The large number of our most important suppliers understood that we had become a much larger customer than either company was separately. And we were able to position ourselves for a mind share, for capacity, by making long-term commitments to them and by working collaboratively with them as they work through their own challenges with COVID-19. And actually, in the March quarter of last year, and in the June quarter rather, we did have a substantial impact in the March quarter, less in June. But I'm really quite proud of the people of 2.6 for what they've been able to achieve. And despite supply chain constraints that are out there today, they're now having a minimal effect on our ability to serve our customers.
No, it's great that you're able to do that, and it's certainly the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. For
That's
sure.
true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Chuck, uncertainty is truly the enemy of public companies and of the public markets in general. How did you approach potential balance sheet fluctuations that may have been impacting your stock price or spooking shareholders on Wall Street in general, especially as in the heart of the pandemic, right after you had closed on Finisar and we're in the midst of this integration?
Well, you have to start someplace. You have a plan. We had the end in mind, and we knew that not everything would fall in line the way in which we envisioned it. But we stuck to our plan, and one of the key elements of our plan, especially important to our debt holders, was our intentions and our actions to delever the company and to delever the risk profile of the company and strengthen the balance sheet. Well, we did that. We had in mind to do that in part by delivering synergies, but also by operating the company as productively and efficiently as we could. That required us to get on with the integration as fast as we possibly could. That required the cooperation and collaboration of our employees as fast as we could. But I think it gave us a great opportunity to this challenge to be able to showcase the best of 2.6, the management, the board cooperation, and the people. And so I would say that we got on with it. We took full advantage of the tailwinds, the ability of the market, the ability to serve people at a time when it was most needed, and we performed. And then at the end of June, at the last couple of days of June and into early July, we went out and did a secondary offering and raised just under $1 billion, and we brought the cash into the company, deleveraged the balance sheet, and put ourselves into the position that we're in today.
Chuck, did you feel like you had to do more communication than you might have had you been a private company?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's the accountability of the public company in general. And by the way, I think it tends to be very healthy, because the transparency that's required, the discipline that's required, the internal processes of internal controls and auditing and external public company auditors. It can be burdensome in some cases, and people generally focus on that. But from a process point of view and from an overall integrity in running a company, I think it's a great feature.
Thanks. You mentioned your management team and the culture and everybody there being just able to step up. After acquisitions, there's often large-scale talent evaluation of the key people in the acquired company, as well as within the acquirer sometimes when they are acquiring folks who have similarities, as you mentioned, synergies.
Right.
Was that impacted in any way, or had you already gone through that process before you got hit by COVID?
We had a limited engagement with the management team at Finisar while we were planning the integration, which we were allowed to do. So we had a good sense for what we judged the culture to be. But no one really can ever be too confident about these things. And I have to tell you that the human resource organization of the combined 2.6 Finisar company, I owe a tremendous credit and debt of gratitude to. They really have done an extraordinary job assembling basically a symphony orchestra of 22,000 people. So what they did was they went out to a few hundred employees quickly, right after the acquisition, and they asked about the compatibility of both of the cultures to find the balancing points, the common denominators, and the differences. And what they found was what I judged early on, and that is that the cultures were a great match, and they were missable. But the other thing that we did, based on the knowledge that we found, the knowledge that we derived, is I realized that both companies each had overlapping values, but had different values. And values, the mission, the vision, and the values, people write books about them, but I've lived through it, and I can assure you that they're all extremely important. So I thought about it for a long time while we were planning, and I decided to change up the values for the combined company. And we disclosed what the new values were to the company on day one. And I asked the entire new company to adopt these values, and I want to tell you what they are, because they're easy to remember. And I was compelled to have something which is really important that underpins my view and a legacy that I'd like to leave for them or with them, along with something that makes it easy to remember and to make a declaratory statement for everybody in the company. So our values are integrity, collaboration, accountability, respect, and enthusiasm. And it makes it easy for everyone to take, even no matter what language they speak, and to be able to state, I care, as a fundamental commitment that everybody brings to the enterprise. And on day one, it couldn't have come at a better time. There's no good time that COVID-19 could ever come. But having had a stated set of values right at the outset, it allowed us to drive across the whole company in response to both opportunities in the market and threats associated with the virus in a very cohesive way. And I think it moved us forward by 1 or 2 years at least in the integration.
No, that's great. I love the idea of enthusiasm being one of your factors of the values. How did you end up with enthusiasm as one of them?
Well, I thought about it for a long time, and I thought about the people that I've met along the way at 2.6. And I thought in particular about my predecessors, the two previous CEOs, CEO 1 and CEO 2. And as I traveled around the company for the last 15 years, traveling to virtually all locations, in the larger locations, including in China, until the virus came, I was traveling there once a month for 10 years. And I sensed an enthusiasm that other people had in the company that rivaled the same enthusiasm that I had. And I think that at times in our lives, we realize that, especially when things have become more challenging, as they sometimes do, our enthusiasm for both the mission and the vision of the company and the strong purpose that we have to change the world is required to carry you through a tough day, a tough quarter, or a tough year, and never give up.
And I appreciate you sharing that. And the literary nature of a lot of what you're talking about today, and in other speeches I've heard you give in presentations, among the things you've done is you've quoted Sun Tzu's Art of War several times. And it seems like there's a lot of cerebral thinking going on with regard to how you approach leadership. And I'd be very interested to ask what lessons that you regularly apply from that to your business.
Okay. I can tell you that I've read it quite a few times. And I know that lots of other leaders do. And I have a top 10 favorite of Sun Tzu, but I have a top 1. And that's the one I'm going to share with you today. And that is that opportunities multiply as they're seized. And I believe that for the company 26 that I joined as a board member in 2000, which was coming off of a roughly $70 million sales year with 1,000 employees, has been on a very dedicated and disciplined track to be able to seize opportunities, and in the course of that, see them multiply.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of those opportunities. I'm a big fan as I look at people's financials and public reports to look at the notes section of it. That's where you find everything. And in the notes sections of a lot of financial reports, you guys talk about intellectual property being a big factor for you guys. And I think it goes to your acquisition strategy in terms of why you've made so many acquisitions over the past decade and a half, as well as had a lot of organic R&D internally. I'm interested in learning, how do you identify those opportunities to seize of either strengthening the organization through internal R&D or opportunities to make acquisitions that strengthen your portfolio?
Yeah. It's another great question for a company that has been a serial acquirer, in the last 10 years or so. Well, R&D is a lifeblood of a business like ours. But our co-founder, Dr. Carl Johnson, said a long time ago that the only thing that stood in the way of us being able to achieve a grand aspiration was the quality of our materials and our imaginations. And doing R&D is in part undertaking a task to learn both what to do and what not to do. So the intellectual property that's associated with a large-scale R&D effort in and of itself needs to be very closely integrated with a market strategy, a product management strategy, and an operations strategy. But I would say overall, we have over 2,000 people in our company who are engaged in research, development, and manufacturing engineering. And our chief technology officer oversees a very healthy process for defining, directing, and protecting the intellectual property that we have in place today. And some of that intellectual property has come by way of acquisitions, and some has come by our organic investments, and some has even come by way of licenses, as we have recently licensed from GE some part of their power electronics portfolio for silicon carbide based electrification of transportation in the future. But this IP management for a company that will invest over $300 million in R&D again this year is another one of the very considerable tasks that need to be interwoven into the strategic planning and the execution of the company.
Chuck, as you look at the future markets, you mentioned the GE partnership that you're talking about, being able to license their technology, the 70-30 mix you currently have. There's some emerging markets out there that I found interesting that you guys were making a play in, whether it was 5% currently with potential growth to exceed 10%. What are those sectors that you're looking at and seeing the best opportunities for growing?
Okay. Well, I'm happy to talk about those things we've disclosed. I won't disclose any of our secrets on the call, and as much as people may have those in mind. But let me talk about a few of the market opportunities that we can see. But before I do, I'd like to say that our core business in communications is a very, very strong business. We're extremely well positioned in it. When we acquired a $66 million revenue company in 2010 in Fuzhou, China, they were the number 26 supplier in the marketplace at $66 million, a little more than 10 years ago, actually 11 years ago in last month. That $66 million business today is over $2 billion in sales. And by most measures is the number one leading supplier, moved up from 26 in 11 years. And so when you look at it, you might think, well, that's maybe reached its plateau. I don't think so. We still have a strong growth prospect ahead of us, and I'm really excited about it. Having said that, I talked about mobility, intelligence, and electrification. The electrification of transportation is upon us. Many countries are already outlawing the internal combustion engine in cars in the next 10 years. And virtually all transportation will move, we believe, ultimately to power electronics. And we think that silicon carbide, a materials that we've been pioneering for more than 20 years, will enable this revolution. And so for us, that's one of the most exciting markets for us, because we can see that over the next many decades. And we can see from the position that we have, our ability to participate in it long term. And it's going to have a profound impact on the world. On life sciences, we have a relatively small footprint, but it's extremely important. I'm quite proud of what the team have done. We are underpinning the PCR test sets that are used today for the COVID-19 identification. And that business itself continues to be very strong. We think that our expertise in lasers, optics, electronics, and our fundamental footprint in life sciences should give us a great opportunity for us to both grow and to have an impact on the world. And finally, I would pick the aerospace and defense market. Aerospace and defense is a very important market for us. And I would say among the things that we expect to see is a further adoption of the semiconductor laser, which we have built out technology platforms in the company and have a very strong capability by way of organic investment and recent acquisitions. And when you look at the platforms that are chosen for those markets, they tend to have 40 to 60 year time horizons. And these are early innings. And so we're really excited about it.
That's a good time window. Chuck, as you've grown and made all these acquisitions and even expanded the footprint worldwide in some countries where maybe it weren't before, how has your communication style changed over the years and evolved?
Okay, well, the biggest single change is that it used to be in person, and it used to be regularly in person, and today it's not. In the last 1 year, I have traveled very little. And before that, I can assure you that I was traveling almost every day for 10 years. And I especially liked, and the management team around me, which is extraordinary, they also liked kind of the personal hands-on touch. At the size and scale that we're at, and under the circumstances that we're operating, we flipped almost overnight into realizing we can do a lot remotely by using the tools that we're enabling. And so I have to say that our vice president of communications and his staff, Mark Lurie's staff, have really done a phenomenal job of managing the communication internally among our employees, as well as for the external stakeholders in our company. But we really stepped up our internal communications. And our employees seem to have really enjoyed that. And they've learned more about the company, I think, in the last year than what they ever knew about the company before. And I believe they have a high regard and a high level of enthusiasm for 2.6 as a result.
That's great. Earlier you mentioned the 50th anniversary this year. Unique circumstances for a 50th anniversary of the company with a global presence. We'll end on a fun note. Talk about what are you hoping to do this year with the team to take time to celebrate? Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's also really a great question. When 2.6 was on its earlier track of acquiring a little bit smaller companies, we used to integrate them and maintain the companies with some of their own individual identity of what they had come into us with. But when we realized that the power of this platform, notwithstanding the aerospace and defense market, but the power of the commercial platform was really being leveraged across all the markets outside of aerospace and defense and across the whole world, I realized that the power of 126, ONE 26, 126, was likely to take us and propel us to a level that we are capable of and that we aspire to. So I began asking the employees to begin thinking about 126. And if you see our annual report, the front cover of our annual report, I actually decided to ask the team and the artist to, let's set a course of 126 degrees on a compass and make it clear to all of our employees that 126 is our direction going together. And I would say on January 26th, on 126 this year, we started the festivities associated with our 50th year celebration. We've had the HR team, the management team, the communications team have had just an absolute blitz of information about our past, about our present, and some glimpse of our enthusiasm for the future, with interviews of special people in the company with special talents, small groups of people. We handed out shirts and hats to all 22,000 people. In China, our 14,000 employees had their own special day to celebrate being part of 26. I mean, I'm deeply touched and humbled by how much people care.
Well, Chuck, thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you once again for sitting down with us today at the Dealmakers Conference and sharing your thoughts on what's been going on.
You're very welcome. It's my great pleasure. I read the magazine and I listen as much as I can. It's a great source of information and networking. And I want to tell you how much we appreciate it. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate hearing that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Have a good day.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, i.e. running a public company, Chuck's unable to join us for the after session today. In its place, however, we invite you to network, attend one-on-one meetings, visit our sponsors, or enjoy the next segment of our Dealmakers Conversation series featuring Michael Anakin, CEO of McGee Women's Research Institute and Foundation. And if you don't know where you're going for the afternoon sessions today, please visit the agenda tab and find those that interest you. We'll see you in a little bit.